Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome back to the channel. We're already into the holiday season, guys, and I don't know about you, but it's the time of year where it's really good to be thinking about giving. It's a good time to be thinking about community, and it's a good time to be thinking about what matters to us and how we can support that and carry our vision forward into the future. And so I just wanted to have this kind of casual little chat with you guys. I don't have a big structure going on here, a big plan, or a big statement to make or anything like that. I thought this would just kind of be a good opportunity to share with you guys one of the causes that's been important to me for a number of years, and how I found it, why it matters to me, and kind of how it fits into some of my philosophical framework and how I view the world and things like that. So first off, I want to apologize because I went and got sick for Thanksgiving. So I'm afraid my voice is a little bit off. I am alive and upright, but I did miss dinner. So I'm not going to be speaking with, all of my normal force and so forth. But I am going to do my best to be heard and hopefully not sound too terrible. So I wanted to start with a quotation from one of my authors. You guys know me and my authors. This is one that's had a very big, significant impact on me in my life, and that would be John Muir. And John Muir wrote in the Yosemite in 1912, "Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul alike." I'm a big outdoor person, guys. I don't really do a lot of that here on YouTube. I suppose if you're into that kind of thing on social media, the place where I'm most active with that type of activities on Instagram, which I'm not very active on at all. So I'm like not necessarily encouraging you to run out and follow me there or anything like that. But if you're interested in my travels and my outdoors and my photography and things like that, that is where I do it. And so if you have been on any of those journeys with me, you've followed me over there, you may have seen that I'm big fan of being in the outdoors. So I just recently, back in September, did an awesome road trip. God, it was a great road trip. Speaking of my man, John Muir, I was very much in his country. I took a road trip down the Pacific Coast Highway from Astoria, Oregon, all the way down to Los Angeles. It was absolutely amazing. Got to see some places I've never seen before. And then when I drove back up from Los Angeles, I came through the mountains. So I got a chance to go to Kings Canyon National Park, of course, Yosemite itself, one of my favorite places on earth, Sequoia National Forest. Just a really wonderful experience, and the kind of thing that for me is very rejuvenating. It's not for everybody, and I definitely do appreciate that. But for those people that do find they have a strong connection with nature and with the natural world, there really is nowhere like the American West. It is one of the most special and diverse and open and magnificent landscapes that there is really anywhere. So it's just a resource that as a country we're extremely fortunate to have. When I first decided to go to law school, I'm going to tell you the story about how that happened, because it's going to give you a roundabout story to how I ended up connecting with the Blue Mountain Land Trust. Because I never expected to be a lawyer. It wasn't in my plan at all. I went to small liberal arts college. I was a philosophy major. I had every vision that I was just going to go on into academia. I'd get my PhD. I'd write snooty articles about Heidegger and Plato and stuff like that. But by the time I finished up my undergraduate degree, I was just so burned out, on school. And it wasn't feeling right. It wasn't the way to go. But I didn't really have a plan B at that point in time. And my parents were living overseas. My father, he was a nuclear engineer for most of his career. So they lived abroad multiple different times, and they were living in Germany when I graduated. And so it was a situation where I didn't really have the option to just go home and move into my parents' basement. I had to come up with a plan and figure out what I was going to do. So I did one of those things where you just kind of spin the globe and go like that and see where you land. And I ended up in Lake Tahoe. Never been there before in my life. Didn't really know much about it. Just knew that it was a place that was supposed to be spectacularly beautiful. And I thought, okay, well, why not? I'll go check that out and see where it takes me. And so I did. I moved to South Lake Tahoe. I spent 3 years living there. They were absolutely wonderful years, spectacular time that I had exploring the Sierra Nevadas and the backcountry. And so it really brought me into a just more personal connection with that part of the world. It really expanded that experience that I think a lot of people have had going out into nature. I know it's very cheesy, but there's the John Denver song, the Rocky Mountain High. He was born in the summer of his 27th year. And I mean, I did. I had a very similar kind of experience to that in this just majestic environment where you can see for miles, and there's incredible wildlife and natural formations, and you can just see the history of the planet written in front of you in a way that you don't see in an urban environment. So it was a very special time for me, my time in Tahoe. And through that, I kind of became aware. I just became a little bit more environmentally aware. I became aware of some of the pressures that the region faced and the reasons why they had these types of pressures. And so I learned that, for example, the slopes of the Sierra Nevadas leading into the Lake Tahoe Basin, they had been clear cut. Very heavily logged in the late part of the 19th century. Of course, the grizzly, the famous California grizzly that used to be very feared predator, top predator in the area. It was long extinct. And then, of course, most recently with people moving into the area, just much more development pressure. So you might see, if you pay attention, if you're like a bumper sticker aficionado, if you do your road trips and you check the bumper stickers out, you've probably seen the Keep Tahoe Blue bumper sticker. And so I learned about the Keep Tahoe Blue, the movement, what it was about, why it mattered, and that type of thing. And what was happening was that because of this, both the history of deforestation and then the development pressure, this was causing a lot of erosion in the Tahoe Basin. So Lake Tahoe is one of the deepest and clearest freshwater lakes in the world. It's second only to Lake Baikal in Russia. And it's spectacular because of that. It's just a deep, brilliant blue. It's just this gem of a lake that sits in between these, very new, they're very new geologically, but just these very spectacular granite peaks of the Sierra Nevadas. And so what was happening is that because of these development pressures and this history of logging that had really changed some of the ecology of the area, this was causing a lot of erosion. And what the erosion would do then is it was depositing a lot of nutrients in the lake, and that was causing algae and algae bloom. And so the lake was starting to turn green. And so there was a growing concern that if these types of pressures aren't addressed, then we run the risk that this beautiful natural place it's going to be altered. The ecology is going to be damaged, and that would be tragic. It's a irreplaceable type of landscape. I also learned through my time in Tahoe about kind of the different ways that had been thought up and implemented to try to protect the lake. So Keep Tahoe Blue, this was a nonprofit organization, NGO, does a lot of advocacy, community education and things like that. There was also what I learned about the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. This was because Tahoe is on the border between California and Nevada. It's in both states. And so to be able to plan in a way that was going to be feasible because of the interstate implications. If California does something, it affects, what's happening in Nevada and so on and so forth. It created a bit of a complicated jurisdictional issue with how exactly do you manage it. And so what happened is Congress got involved, and they created an interstate compact. And so basically California and Nevada would both work together through this federal agency, essentially, that was created, this interstate agency, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. And so this organization was kind of the umbrella under which planning activities took place in the basin. Now, the problem was, from my perspective, and kind of how I experienced the area, was that this top-down type of regulation, it was extremely divisive and unpopular. And one of the examples of that I'll give was that because of this history of erosion and sedimentation and things like that, because of deforestation, there was very, very strict regulation about vegetation management and cutting down trees. You could not just, if you lived in the Tahoe Basin, you couldn't just go cut down a tree in your yard. You weren't allowed to do that. You would have to go through a process and get a permit, and that permit might be denied for any number of reasons. This created a lot of concerns among homeowners and developers and things like that because of the risk of fire. Sierra Nevadas has a fire ecology. It always has, but because of human activity in the area and just the way that the forest had been managed, fire had been suppressed. These processes weren't allowed to take place naturally for a long period of time, and so that changed the ecology pretty significantly, and it changes the risk of fire in the area. And so the concern was, if we're not allowed to, for example, clear vegetation around our homes, then if a wildfire comes through, this is a much more dangerous situation for preserving structures, losing structures, and things like that. And so that was a concern that a lot of people had voiced. But the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, had their priorities and their mission and so forth. Well, unfortunately, this kind of concern kind of became a reality in now I'm going to forget what year it was that the big fire, the Heavenly Fire, hit Lake Tahoe. It was in about 2006 or so, sometime in that ballpark. It was after I had left and gone to law school. But this was a major fire that came through, and kind of as predicted, there were, major structural losses. So I saw through this experience how just there needed to be some kind of compromise between people's investment in their own land and in their own property, and their connection to their own land and to their own property with the needs of the community as a whole and the environment as a whole. You really need to have both sides of the equation, where the individual right has to be respected, but at the same time, it can't be completely unrestricted. So these are the types of situations that I was dealing with when I was making the decision to go to law school. Now, like I said, originally I hadn't planned on it. It wasn't in my plan. It came up this way when I first went to Lake Tahoe. I just got a job through a temp agency, because I knew how to type. So they would be able to get me a job. And I ended up getting my job at the El Dorado County Superior Court, the Unified Court System. So I worked in the court system there for about a year and a half. And that was really my first hands-on experience with the justice system. I have family that were lawyers, but they weren't really nearby. These were my dad's family, mostly over in Montana. So I certainly knew them growing up, but they were kind of distant. We didn't like hang out a lot and things like that. I didn't really know a lot about what they did. Didn't have my own experiences, running into the justice system or anything like that growing up. So it was pretty new to me. And I did that for about a year and a half. I was the jury coordinator at one point. So I was the person that would send out all the jury summonses, get all of the excuses, the hardship requests, things like that. If there was going to be a jury trial, I would buy the lunch. Just little details like that. That was kind of my job. But I was also just a regular court clerk. And so when people would come in and they would have issues, or they would want to look at documents, or they would have questions about something they were supposed to do with their case, I had part of that customer service role as well. So that's when I first started thinking maybe I should go to law school. And the main reason why was because I learned real quickly kind of a lot about how the system worked, but I wasn't able to communicate that because as a clerk, you're not allowed to give legal advice. And so people would come in with questions and I would find it very frustrating to not be able to answer them, even though I knew what the answer was. But you weren't allowed to do that through that type of context. And so I thought, well, if I want to be helpful, then I need to be looking at this. I need to be looking at this other path to help people be able to navigate it. So I started thinking that I was going to go that direction. And once I started thinking that I was going to go that direction, I started thinking I need to be in a better financial situation to do that. You don't make a ton of money as a court clerk. It's not really set up to do that. So I switched gears entirely and I ended up working in construction. That's how I found out about the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. So I spent about a year and a half, close to 2 years, painting houses, doing general construction labor. I cut rebar, I dug foundations, I did a lot of job site stuff. And it was fun and I really enjoyed it. But I also recognized, when I'm 40 years old, I don't want to be hanging off of a 40-foot ladder, trying to paint this house. This is a young man's type of game. So originally my thought process was, well, I'm going to go to law school and I'll just get this education and I'll use that education to come back and work in construction. I'll learn more about contracts. I'll learn more about planning. I'll learn more about land use. And I'll just basically use that education to help me kind of be better at this sort of job and do it in a way that's, responsible, but also, just something cool to do. I enjoyed working with my hands and having an actual product, at the end of the day, you can look at it, be like, wow, I accomplished something here. Obviously loved working in that particular environment. It's a gorgeous place to be outside and doing that kind of work. So that's what took me to law school, originally was thinking that, I was gonna go into construction. I was gonna kind of work on the periphery of this environmental land use kind of world. So then when I got to law school, I started to pursue that. And I was continuing to think about just these ideas, these things that had started to occur to me from this experience in Tahoe, and kind of struggling with how do you reconcile these problems. I'm a real firm believer in property rights, and I always have been. And I'll tell you the reason why is just one of these things that, from my perspective, civilization really depends on it. If you're going to have an organized type of community, then we have that Maslow, that hierarchy of needs, right? And at the very, very base of that hierarchy are these very fundamental needs for security, for shelter, for food. And you can't get those things without some type of connection to the land, right? Food has to be grown. Food has to be hunted. Shelter has to be built. Clothes, you need to have some type of stability if you're going to be able to cooperate with other people. And so property is the way that human, legal systems, most of our complex systems have developed to be able to accommodate that, to be able to cooperate with. We can all have the security that we need and the food that we need and the shelter that we need, and you will respect mine and I will respect yours. So to me, that's a really fundamental part of being able to function in a civilization, especially a complex civilization. But there's downsides, right? There's downsides to property. Big common downside is the externalization factor, right? The fact that property, it is a fiction. It's just an idea that we have in our heads that this is mine and that's yours. There's nothing in the ground that establishes that. It's just an idea that we have in our minds that we've decided to live with. But so as a practical matter, then the idea that I could do something on my ground that's completely independent and has no effect whatsoever on yours is kind of a fiction. It's kind of a fiction. And certainly when you start getting into the aggregate, where you can talk about, the actions of hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people, and then the impact that has on other land and other environments. So there's always been some tension there between individually. This is something we need to recognize, but there's also a community interest in how individual property is managed. So when I was in law school and got on the law review, Yeah, exciting times. When you get on the law review, what you do is you write a research article, and it's kind of your, for me, when I was an undergraduate, I had to write a thesis. I had to write an undergraduate thesis. So it wasn't like the first long and intensive writing project I'd ever done, but it was probably more extensive just in terms of substantiation. Let's be real. When you write a philosophy thesis, you can kind of play a little bit. It's philosophy, for heaven's sakes. With law's all about citation. Law's all about sourcing. Law's all about attribution. Very little is intended to be original in the law. It's supposed to be something that's drawn on from other sources. And so it's this process of creating something new from things that already exist. So from that perspective, it was a very intensive type of writing process for me. But I wanted to use the opportunity to try to explore some of these ideas that I was having and to kind of reconcile as best as I could some of these ideas. And so I did. I wrote my law review article. It was published in the Thomas Jefferson Law Review back in, 2003 or 2004. It's one of those things that nobody's ever read and nobody ever will, and it's fine. It's, not a magnum opus, by any means. But my article was called, Will Regulations Keep Tahoe Blue? Searching for Stewardship in Property Law and Regulatory Takings Analysis. So I was focused on this top-down regulation model. This idea that, if the government, just steps in and establishes rules about how people can use their land, that's going to be a way to fix these environmental problems. And the concern that I had about that was that I had seen kind of firsthand in Tahoe how there's a counter reaction to that, because people don't like being told what to do on their own land. But then there's also some kind of counterintuitive consequences that can result from that. And so the example that I used in my paper was, let's just say you're an owner of 500 acres out in the mountains. You own this beautiful, beautiful mountain property. You run cattle on your property. You don't overutilize it or anything like that. It's just a way to make a livelihood without kind of putting undue pressure on the environment. It's well integrated with the needs of the ecology. You have a small barn, you have a small creek, and then one day there's a bald eagle, and you find that it's nesting right outside your barn, And that would be so cool, right? That would be awesome. Like in so many ways, I would just love that. It would be amazing to like watch an eagle family like grow up right outside your door. What an amazing experience. But in the modern regulatory world, that could be potentially a really big problem because it can be a crime for you to harass or for you to interfere with this protected species. And so things that have been part of your ordinary course of life, letting your cattle out of the barn, running your quad around to do your chores, ordinary maintenance on the building, these types of things might run into conflict. They might put you in a position where you're in legal jeopardy now because they could be interfering with the well-being of this wildlife. And so that creates a phenomenon that's out there. It's been recognized, been studied. Shoot, shovel, shut up. Very counterintuitive process. But the problem is that if people recognize that this thing has risk now, then it's just a natural economic incentive to get rid of the risk. So that's the problem that I was kind of running into with this type of top-down environmental regulation. Is that one, it just it doesn't necessarily work from a technical standpoint, right? Like people can be wrong, things can be mismanaged, priorities can be misaligned with the priorities of people do actually live there, and like that needs to be considered too. But at the same time, it is counterintuitive in terms of the whole ethic of being a good steward of the land. You go from this amazing once-in-a-lifetime experience that you might be able to have to, if I allow this to continue, I could be taken away and put in jail for just continuing to live my life the way that I've been living it through no fault of my own. So that was the idea that I was really struggling with, and I looked at it through the lens of regulatory takings. So regulatory takings, in theory, this could be some type of limit on the ability of the government to engage in this type of top-down regulation, because it arises out of the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause. And so under the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause, government can't take property without just compensation. But the way that the case law has developed in this context is it's drawn a really, really sharp distinction between coming in and physically taking your land, right? Coming in and cutting down your tree, coming down and building a road on part of your property, versus regulatory taking. I'm going to tell you, you can't do anything over here, but I'm not actually like changing the title in any way. I'm not actually entering your land and doing anything on your property. I'm just passing a law that says, oh, that driveway you want to build, yeah, you can't. And so in the physical takings context, it's very protected. Pretty well established. Even a very small physical taking or very small physical intrusion, if the government is going to do that, yeah, they can. They have the power of eminent domain, but they're going to have to pay you for it. Regulatory takings evolved in an extremely different context. And so it culminated in this decision down in South Carolina involving the South Carolina Coastal Commission, where Justice Scalia, Antonin Scalia, wrote an opinion holding that basically, unless a regulation completely deprives you of all economic value of your property, it's not a taking. It's not a taking. And so there's a way to look at that framework and see it as, well, this is a great opportunity for environmental regulation, right? Because as long as you can still, I don't know, pick mushrooms on your property, as long as you can still do something, then it's not a taking and we don't have to pay you for it. We can just impose it and make you live with it. And this was very disturbing to me. It was very troubling to me. And I just didn't like that idea of regulation happening in that kind of way. It didn't seem fair to me. It didn't seem right. And most importantly, it seemed really counterintuitive because it's going to alienate people from the very values that you're trying to promote. If you're trying to say we need to be more respectful of the land, we need to have a better understanding of how this land is connected to the other land, of the greater integration of the ecology and the complexity of the systems and things like that, you cut people off from that. If your perspective is we're going to tell you, what you can and can't do. It's a very, very alienating type of approach. So that was the idea that I was exploring when I was in law school, and I wrote my law review article. This idea that environmental regulation may not really be the best way to carry out the kinds of goals that I think conservationists, regardless of your politics, conservation is not a blue issue. It's not a red issue. People are conservationists because they like salmon. People are conservationists because they like to hunt. I mean, it really does cross the political spectrum in that way. But regardless of that, the use of regulation as an environmental tool, I saw that as just potentially dangerous. Like, it's certainly, yes, it's a tool, and maybe sometimes we need to resort to that tool. But it's just something that we need to be aware of the downsides, and we need to resist this temptation to use this regulatory state to kind of be the exclusive way of achieving these goals, just because the Supreme Court said, well, you kind of have the power to do that if you really want to. Well, then life took a lot of turns, and I ended up as a criminal defense lawyer, and did not end up going back to Tahoe and working in construction. But I did end up in Eastern Washington in Walla Walla in a small general practice, where I got to do a lot of different things. And I've talked about some of that before. Obviously, I did a lot of criminal defense work. That's always been a big part of my legal practice. But I did get to do some land use work. I did get to do some environmental type of work, and some work with development and things like that. And just got to experience it a little bit more from all sides. So while I was in Walla Walla, this is how I came across and became involved with the Blue Mountain Land Trust. And so I learned about the Blue Mountain Land Trust a little bit before I moved to Walla Walla in about 2000, 2008, 2009 maybe. Learned about it pretty early on. And at the time, this was a very small organization. I just was kind of aware that it existed. I kind of knew about this conservation easement thing. And it was intriguing to me because this seemed to be like a really good common ground with all these issues that I was facing. Like we can't have unrestricted, completely free property, because people will just naturally impose their externalities on others. We'll have tragedies of the commons problems, with resources that are mobile, things like wildlife and stuff like that. So you can't have it completely unrestricted, but you can't just also have this top-down, type of regulation. That's counterintuitive, and people will end up ultimately less, environmentally minded anyway. People will have less of an ethic of stewardship under that type of model. So it needs to be something in the middle, and that's how I learned about the conservation easement. So I'll tell you a little bit about what a conservation easement is and how this kind of fits into the big picture of conservation. And so what it is it's just a tool that uses ordinary property law, property rights, to be able to achieve stewardship, conservation types of goals. The area that I was in, Eastern Washington and in the Walla Walla area, this is a very rural environment. This is a farming, largely an agricultural type of community. Wheat farming for the most part. Big producer of wheat, has some very, very fertile land. Recently, by recently I mean within the past 30 years or so, it's become a big wine grape growing region. It's part of Washington's wine country. I will tell you, if you're a wine person, you should have Walla Walla on your list. They produce some absolutely fantastic big red wines. All different kinds, Bordeaux varieties, Rhone varieties, some excellent wine coming out of that region. So there's just a lot of different issues, a lot of different problems, a lot of different challenges, a lot of different perspectives that come into play into these types of communities. You have somebody like me I'm not a farmer, right? But I enjoy the outdoors. I like to be able to go out and hike. I like to be able to go out and run. I like to be able to enjoy scenery. I like to have wildlife around. Like to be able to go out into the mountains, things like that. You have people that are making their livelihood off of the land. People that need to till, people that need to harvest, people that need to use chemicals, people that need to hunt, people that need to control predators. We got lots of rangeland out here, and cattle and predators don't really go well together. So there's a lot of competing interests that come into play, and a lot of different competing values that have to be accommodated. So the way that a conservation easement fits into all of this is it's just a way for a private landowner, whatever the nature of your property, to recognize, okay, here's the value that my property has from a conservation standpoint. Maybe it's scenic. I have something unusually spectacularly beautiful here. Maybe it's a watershed resource. I've got a part of a stream system here. Maybe there's traditional salmon runs through here. Something that could be restored, help improve the ecology of the area. Maybe I have other wildlife. Maybe I have particularly fertile agricultural soil. Something that it would be a shame to take out of production, because at some point it's going to be more economically beneficial to just build a subdivision there. This ground can produce 80 bushels an acre of wheat, but without irrigation. I'm talking some pretty spectacular land in some of these places. But you got to deal with farmers in particular often have a lot of challenges. You have estate tax challenges. Estate tax, as they say, killed the family farm, because you run into problems with inheritance. If you have a large, successful farm that's valuable, property values continue to increase. It's not liquid wealth, but you're going to get a tax bill that has to be paid. And so that can put a lot of pressure on farm properties to potentially subdivide, to potentially sell. And that's just kind of a unique pressure that farmers face by virtue of the fact that they, to be a farmer, you kind of have to be a large scale landowner. So the conservation easement recognizes what is it about this particular property that is worth conserving, that should keep it out of development. Not every property should be kept out of development. I think that's something that's really important to point out. Not every property has conservation values. And so if you're kind of picking and choosing between what should be developed and what should not be developed, everything's going to kind of fall on a scale of what's worth keeping in a natural state versus what isn't. And so probably the lowest thing on the scale would be, well, this property that's already been developed. This brownfield over here. Maybe we should go and rebuild that. Before we go in and take some virgin ground, and as they say, take paradise and put in a parking lot. There's just different priorities depending on the location and the characteristics of any particular piece of land. So not every land necessarily has a lot of high conservation value, but a lot of land does. And so the conservation easement is basically a way for a landowner to use property law to say, I'm going to preserve these particular values. I'm going to limit the use of the property, the development of the property, through an easement, which is a perpetual land grant. And through that, then there's going to be an organization that will be almost like a trustee. They're responsible for maintaining this easement. They need to monitor it. They need to make sure that these conservation values are still in place. They need to make sure that the restrictions that have been put on the land are being respected. And so that's where the Blue Mountain Land Trust would come in. Blue Mountain Land Trust would work with landowners to develop conservation easements, find ways to fund conservation easements, and then be in charge of monitoring and just keeping track of how is this easement doing. Sometimes there would be restoration involved. We'd have a property that maybe in its existing state doesn't have a massive amount of conservation value, but it can be restored. It can be like a part of a stream. For example, I remember one of the projects fairly early on was a project along part of the Walla Walla River. And back in the old days of the Walla Walla River, and this was not unique to the Walla Walla. They did this where I am now too, in the Tri-Cities and the Yakima River Basin. Very common to do for your flood control. You would just sort of like push your old junker cars over the bank. And that was how you would like hold in the bank and stabilize the bank. Well, from a environmental standpoint, this is not ideal, right? Old cars are kind of full of old chemicals and things like that. And ultimately, like they don't even necessarily work all that well anyway, because what happens is just, the ground around it will get eroded, and then maybe it'll just like tumble into the creek, or you'll have, a big flood. You'll have like a particularly big flood year. It'll like dislodge some of these old cars and stuff like that. So just one of these situations where you have an area that could be a lot more ecologically healthy than it is, but it needs some elbow grease to get it into that kind of shape. And so often the Blue Mountain Land Trust would be involved in helping to coordinate that type of restoration activity, to put landowners in contact with organizations that can help do that type of restoration and so forth. One of the funnest projects I remember doing when I was on the board. So I ended up on the board of directors for the Blue Mountain Land Trust, and I was actually trying to count how many years was I on the board, because I don't remember. I really don't. I want to say it was like 6 or 7. I was the board president for a little bit when we were going through Land Trust Alliance accreditation. But at one point when I was on the board, we were doing this. We were doing this project that was essentially, it was kind of a cross between a restoration project and just a sort of new construction. And what it was is it was a wetland project. There was this area just out in the middle of a wheat field that was a low area. It had kind of, I think, conventionally been like a seep. And this would be a spot where just because of how the area is configured, it's very dry in the west. You may have heard, very arid. And so when you have a nice little oasis, that's a real attractive area for wildlife, for birds, migratory birds, butterflies, just everything that you can name, all your small mammals, your deer, like all of it. And so this particular area, it had historically kind of like been a seep like that, but it had been farmed for, centuries. And so the farming changes, it changes the slopes, and it changes the configuration of the ground. And the farmer had an interest in restoring this area to that more natural condition. And so we did. We basically built a wetland. I don't remember off the top of my head now how many acres it is. It's not massive, it's, yeah. I don't know. I don't want to guess. It's certainly not as much as 100. Is it more than 20? I don't remember. I want to say it's, somewhere in that ballpark, if even that. But what I remember is one February. It's cold. It's gray, and we were out in our muck boots, in our dirty pants and whatever, with our beanie hats on, out in this cold, freezing rain, and we were planting bulrushes out here in this new wetland that had been constructed. Somebody from I think it was Fish and Game, somebody from Washington Department of Fish and Game. But it might have been another organization. They had, harvested these bulrushes from somewhere else, and so we were just out there planting them. And it was just fun. It was a fun thing to do, and one of the coolest things about it was then over the next couple of years, the next 2-3 years, seeing how that land transformed. It was really unbelievable how fast it happened. How it went from just kind of looking like a construction zone. Like you just, things you can tell like, oh, this has been graded and this has been excavated, and, it doesn't look very natural, to it just took over. And instantly, the wildlife that's there, it became this corridor. It was just a very cool thing to see how quickly something like that can take place. So that was part of my experience with the Blue Mountain Land Trust. It's an organization that has grown a lot since the time I first heard of it. When I first heard of the Blue Mountain Land Trust, they had a couple of easements. they've now, since then, we've expanded the service area. It's now, when I first started, it was just in a few counties in Eastern Washington. It's now several counties of Eastern Washington, extending down into Eastern and Central Oregon. A few thousand acres under conservation. But I don't want to tell that whole story about the Blue Mountain Land Trust. I do have somebody here who has been waiting very patiently backstage. And I'm going to go ahead and bring her on. She agreed to come on and share a little bit with you guys about the Blue Mountain Land Trust. And she's the current executive director. We actually kind of had paths crossing, like almost ships in the night, because she was coming into the organization just as I was kind of passing out. So it's been kind of a chance for me to get to know her a little bit better as well. But I'm going to go ahead and bring her on stage now and introduce you to Amanda Martino. Marty, welcome so much to the channel.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, so glad to have you. Glad to have you back. Well, hopefully I haven't totally misled everyone on kind of the story and the status of the Blue Mountain Land Trust. But you're obviously the one that is closest to the ground right now and can share a little bit about where the organization is at, the kinds of things that have been accomplished in recent years, and basically why this type of organization is such a valuable one to support.
No, you did a great job at introducing us, Andrea. And thank you so much for your time as a board member. This year we celebrate 25 years as an organization, and it's because we had amazing board members and volunteers and committee members over the years that made that possible. So thank you for all that you did for us as an organization. It's a little wild to think that we're at 25 years and 23,327 acres and 44.1 miles of rivers and streams protected. It's a pretty cool to be at this part of the organization's history and to think about all the exciting work that we have coming.
One of the things that I've particularly enjoyed about, and this is not just the Blue Mountain Land Trust, but the Blue Mountain Land Trust certainly has a big part of it. There was something that when I was in Walla Walla, it was the Walla Walla way. There was a very cooperative, collegial type of attitude between all types of different organizations when it comes to coming together and being able to work collaboratively and solve problems. I saw this a lot when we had this program, this kind of pilot program in Walla Walla for water management. The Walla Walla Watershed Planning Board was kind of this organization that was created by state legislation, and it gave the area some sort of special tools to try to be able to manage water resources in a way that other places in the state weren't going to be able to do. And basically, the idea is trying to help get more water back in stream, but addressing, obviously we were an irrigation area. Agriculture is going to always be dependent on irrigation. Municipalities are always going to be dependent on irrigation. And so there's a lot of interests in play in that type of a scenario, and a lot of different stakeholders involved. And it was always very impressive to me how collaboratively that process has always been able to work. And so one of the things that I always appreciated about Blue Mountain Land Trust as well is those types of collaborative relationships that go into so many of these different conservation easements. And one of the big partners that I know that the organization has worked with a lot is the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And I'd love to know a little bit about just your thoughts on that relationship and how that's played out, kind of what it's like to work with the partners that you have when it comes to these conservation projects.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of a land trust is that we really have the ability to partner with so many different groups and so many different interests, and really find the sweet spot around how we can collaborate on conserving things that are important to multiple interest groups and stakeholders in our communities. And our partnership with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation has been one of the most I think, exemplary partnerships of all those that we have. And the projects that we've done with the tribe have been really beneficial to both fish and wildlife habitat, but also to the farmers and ranchers that participate in these projects. And then we've recently been working on some projects that have some flood mitigation benefits for communities downstream. The tribe does private lands restoration. So they will restore streams and rivers that are on private lands within the ceded territories of the tribe. And that's to improve habitat for first food species like salmon, lamprey, and other fish and wildlife. And it also has the benefit for the farmer rancher of having well-connected floodplains and restored habitat on their property. And as the land trust, what we can do in that scenario is we can protect that restoration with a conservation easement so that it has the years it needs to fully mature. You know, you mentioned Brewer wetland and watching that progress over time. It really does need quite a bit of time to ensure that, you know, those habitats can get established, that that restoration impact can have time to really take hold. And so a conservation easement is a way of us securing that restoration investment. And it also then compensates the farmer or rancher for the land that they are putting into that restored area. So they may be giving up the right to farm that riparian area. And so instead they're compensated by a conservation easement. And a lot of times restored floodplains have the benefit of mitigating for flood risks. They slow the river down, they allow the water to spread out on the floodplain. And in a lot of our communities in the West, rivers and streams were straightened, pushed up against the hillside or straightened so that farming equipment could get in and out more easily, which was beneficial to have more land for farming. But what it meant is that you get a fire hose effect with the river. And so the river really can't slow down naturally when it's been manipulated like that. And so putting the river back into its natural state can have that additional benefit of reducing flood risk downstream. And so those have been the really, I think, most fun projects for us to work on because they're that sweet spot of community benefit, landowner benefit, tribal benefit, and fish and wildlife habitat benefit.
I wanted to just bring up, you had you sent me a presentation that you've previously done for the Blue Mountain Land Trust. I wanted to bring it up, not necessarily to go through everything, but I mean the visuals.
Yeah, the
to share
visuals
with
are
people
stunning.
who aren't familiar with this region, what it is that we're talking about and why. We have people on the channel from all kinds of different places. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the Blue Mountain region of Walla Walla. This is the type of scenery and environment, and you can really see how there's this strong integration between the farming type of agricultural activity, the mountains, the lowlands, the riparian types of areas, and that's why I think one of the reasons why this is such a rich area for this type of work. Is just the nature of the landscape that we have there, and the kind of development patterns and resources that just kind of give us that opportunity to be able to, you don't have to make a wholesale change to be able to make a difference. Like you don't have to like take all the land out of production. You don't have to change all the agricultural practices. Things can be modified, or things can be just kind of shifted around and still make a really significant difference from an ecological standpoint. I know that one of the projects that Blue Mountain Land Trust has closed on since I have been on the board had a big kind of big role with that, as far as kind of integrating the cattle management with the environmental restoration and the values of the property, and that's down there in Central Oregon. Can you maybe tell a little bit about that project and what that entailed?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think I love this photo for so many reasons, because I think, as you said, it's such a good snapshot of how in our region, agricultural land and fish and wildlife habitat are not separate places. They're so interconnected, you can't necessarily pull those things apart. And working with those multiple uses is when we have those great successes for both, agricultural communities, but also for fish and wildlife habitat and success. And the project that you mentioned is Secret Valley Ranch. And this project is really near and dear to my heart because it's the first conservation easement I ever worked on. And so it was a big one to learn on. It's about 8,877 acres. So it is our biggest project. Is about a third of our total protected acreage. And Mark and Patty Bennett are the ranchers, just exemplary stewards. I mean, every property improvement investment that they could make into ensuring that the property was managed in a way to balance the needs of the cattle operation with also the needs of the sage grouse, which the greater sage grouse are a western high desert bird that relies on healthy sagebrush steppe habitat for survival, and they've been in decline for years in the western United States. Mm-hmm. But on the Bennett Ranch, they were growing in population, which was pretty impressive to see because they were still grazing the property. But they had just put so much thought and effort and care and stewardship into the way they rotated cattle to ensure they weren't impacting the fields that the sage grouse were nesting in, that they had really planted a lot of vegetation along the river to ensure that there was, cover and shade, that they were really, really intentional about the way that they monitored and rotated their grazing to ensure that they were leaving healthy stands of native grasses. I mean, they were really in just such a exemplary landowners for how conservation and agriculture can work together on that property. So after about 5 years, we completed a conservation easement on the Secret Valley Ranch that will both protect the ranching, but also will protect the sage grouse. And we do that through a holistic grazing plan, which is a grazing plan that is designed to rotate the grazing in a way that improves the soil health, improves the rangeland quality, and just make sure that both the cattle operation and the habitat can be viable for generations to come.
Mm-hmm. I remember that particular easement because through my work on the board, I would always get to do some legal work on some of these easements, and some can be more challenging than others can be. But one of the interesting things about the American West and just the way that land settlement took place in the American West, you can run into just some crazy problems in all kinds of different contexts. Sometimes you can run into problems with surveys that like old surveys that are not accurate. They would do what they I think refer to now as like tavern surveying, where sometimes it would just be a situation where they're not actually on the land that they're out there, purporting to mark and measure out and things like that. So you can have issues with land records that derive from these original inaccurate surveys. You can have issues with railroads, old railroad grants. Railroads received a massive amount of property just essentially as a gift from the United States throughout the process of Western expansion. And then that land would be given sometimes with different types of conditions on it, as far as like if it's used or if it's abandoned or if it's never developed. What happens to that land? Does it revert back to the United States? Does it stay in the property of the railroad? If it stays in the property of a railroad and a railroad goes bankrupt, what happens to it then? So it was one of these issues, one of these areas that kind of from a legal standpoint, it can pose some very unique problem solving to be able to work through and get sorted out, so that these title issues can be wrapped up and resolved. So I'll go ahead and kind of walk us through the presentation and let you tell us basically anything you want as I go through the slides. I always just enjoy, I enjoy the pictures so much.
Yeah, I think we have the benefit of living in one of the most incredible, beautiful and diverse regions in the United States. So it's hard to take a bad photo. I think you really have to try at it. And all of these pictures are from our protected properties. So this particular shot is from Canyon Creek Ranch, which is adjacent to the Painted Hills National Monument in Central Oregon. And if you haven't heard of the Painted Hills, I'd encourage you to Google it. It's pretty fantastic.
Painted Hills is really fantastic. I just went there for the very first time on the road trip that I was talking about at the beginning of the show. When I was coming back up from Southern California, I came up through Central Oregon and spent a night at John Day and went out to the Painted Hills. Never seen anything like it. It was not at all what I expected it to be. It's really quite spectacular. If you guys go ahead and Google that, you'll see what we mean. But it's just this very fascinating geologic area. It's also in this area a big site for fossils. Like there's a lot of fossils there. I don't know why. Do you know why exactly that is?
It's fossilized temperate rainforests, I believe. Like Central Oregon used to be this really lush tropical region. And then over time, I guess maybe just the way that region preserved itself, they've been able to unearth so many incredible fossils. The John Day Basin fossil beds are one of the national monuments, and they have an incredible visitor center. But these hills and geologic formations are just bright reds and yellows and blues based on what minerals were fossilized. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And so to have a property adjacent to something like that, that's private land that is now conserved, it's adding to that, ensuring that something like that in a place like that is not developed and disturbed. So that's a really great project that we really enjoyed working on.
And that's one of the things too that I always appreciated about the conservation easement is the ability that it has to kind of supplement the benefit that you get from having public lands. There's obviously not just one way to have a healthy environment, right? Or to have good public land. I'm a big proponent of public land. I've just noticed in the past couple days, there's been like social media conversation about the idea of like divesting or privatizing some of the public lands, and like makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up a little bit, like just personally, because the public lands are just such an important part of the lifestyle out here. Not just because of the access that we have, the ability to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail and hunt, on the BLM lands and things like that. But because they do provide that habitat and those resources that are kind of necessary. Like if you want to, be able to hunt, you have to have hunting habitat. And this idea that you can just have like checkerboard pieces of land that would support that it's not feasible. And so the ability of the conservation easement to be able to supplement those public lands, that, some of them are going to be contiguous, but some of them are not. And just helping to kind of create the corridors and things like that we need for healthy ecologies. It's such an important part of the tool for having healthy public lands.
Yeah, Fish and Wildlife don't recognize property boundaries and fence lines in the same way that people do. And so it is really important that we conserve private land in the same way that we do public land. And also that we try and build big contiguous blocks for that exact reason, migratory corridors that we look at. The larger a landscape that's intact, the more beneficial it's going to be for all of those species. And, I would really love my nieces and nephews to be able to see herds of elk the way that I can see them. And that's only going to be possible if they have the space that they need to survive and thrive. And they don't care if they're on national forest or if they're on somebody's ranch. And so those things are both equally as important. But there are, I think there's just a lot that people don't know about private land conservation and the benefits. So thank you for letting us highlight that here today.
Yeah.
So the other thing to note, sorry, Andrea.
No, that's okay.
This service area map is actually what I was going to ask you to pull over to. So you can see this is the area that we work in. And so we don't have all of this land protected. That's not possible based on its size, but we work in 4 counties in southeastern Washington and 7 counties in eastern Oregon, which essentially follows the whole Blue Mountain range. The Blue Mountains stretch from central Oregon to southeastern Washington, and they are the bridge between the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas. And so there's a lot of migration that happens in this region, and there's more that's projected to happen as our climate shifts. But out of this mapped area, 63% of this is private land. So that's about 8.6 million acres. So really private land ownership is incredibly important, and stewardship and conservation and management of that private land is even more so when you're looking at an area of this size. And so I think you covered this pretty well. So I'm happy to skip past it. But, a land trust, we can buy land, we can accept donations of land, or we can protect private land through conservation easements. And we are a nonprofit organization, and we work with landowners and communities to complete these projects. And this is one of those restoration properties that we've done with the tribe.
I remember this. I remember this property. This is a beautiful, beautiful little stretch of the river.
And so this is a really great shot of that beautiful opening farmland image. This is a zoomed in. This is on one of our protected farms, Mud Creek Dixie Ranch. And again, just kind of illustrates that fish and wildlife habitat and farms and ranches are very much interconnected and important for each other. And so land trusts protect a whole host of different places: natural habitats, watersheds, scenic landscapes, and working lands. Some land trusts will focus on one or the other. We have such a diverse and incredible area to work in that we work on every single one of these types of projects.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I like to bring this up and just highlight it is because we live in such a polarized world, especially politically speaking, and there's just such the strong tendency to put things into boxes of, blue state this, red state that, or whatever, and just, these ideas that people have about kind of where conservation fits in with that. And so I like to point out that when it comes to conservation, it isn't just about any one particular value or any one particular priority. I think the farmland preservation is a really important part of that because, it's reality. People often think, preservation, environmental preservation and restoration, this is like a blue state thing. But farmland preservation is something that I think doesn't fit neatly into that type of binary thinking. It's a very just traditional type of practice, type of land use. It's not the type of thing that I think people often think of when they're thinking about what needs to be conserved. But farmland is an important resource. It's a finite resource. It's not something that is easily put into production, like more farmland put into production in ways that is actually valuable, without a lot of inputs, without a lot of irrigation chemistry and things like that. And that's even before you get to the externalities of not so much an issue out here in the West, but in the Midwest where I just was, you can get more land into farm production, but you're going to cut down a forest to do that. And so there's going to be other factors at play there. And so in our particular area, we're like on the boundary of the Palouse region. We do extend into parts of the Palouse in southeastern Washington.
We do. That is part of the area that we would work in, but we don't have any projects there. So there is another land trust that operates in the Palouse. So for those of you who may not be super familiar with how land trusts determine their service area, it's usually based on a geographic boundary, like a specific watershed or a region. And there are other land trusts that work in other geographic areas. So that's how we kind of make sure that we work together and address any kind of gaps geographically. But so yes, we kind of skirt the Palouse a little.
And the reason why I brought that up is because the Palouse, the soils of the Palouse are like legendary. I mean, probably. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how they would hold up globally to like the best farmland that's out there, but I mean, it's impressive. It's impressive. Like these are very rich soils. They are often many meters deep. It's some of the most productive farmland that we have, and so that's important. It's important that be preserved, that not be eroded, that not be treated in ways that makes it less productive. And so as far as preserving that resource too, it's not just like, oh, the land trust is out to protect fish or to protect wildlife. It's also there to protect farms and ranches and those productive types of landscapes as well.
Yeah, I think we've really, one of the things that I think opened a lot of people's eyes to the importance of protecting farmland and having farms here in the United States was during COVID-19, when there was such a challenge to our supply chain and getting access to food. And so we really, when we look at a place to protect, we look at protecting farmland that's high quality farmland. And there's a pretty incredible report called Farms Under Threat. And they found that between 2001 and 2016, 11 million acres of America's farmland was developed or paved over or otherwise taken out of production. And so, that study at this point is 8 years behind on the actual development rates. But, that makes it even more critical that we protect the best farmland while we can, because you can grow, two patches of dirt aren't equal in terms of what they can grow and what they can provide. And so we have a lot of really important soils and great growing conditions, and particularly in Southeast Washington. And so really important that we conserve those lands for farming and for viable agriculture so that we can, feed our communities.
Yeah, and this was one of the things that I kind of mentioned briefly at the beginning, but it was one of the reasons why conservation easements appealed to me initially as a tool. is because it had the potential I mean, solve or at least address, be part of the solution for a lot of the problems that farmers face with succession. It's getting harder and harder all the time to inherit a farm or for farming to be passed on through generations. It's like many other industries, the tendency is towards consolidation. It's towards corporate ownership and management. The family farm is just not, for a whole variety of reasons, so easy to maintain anymore. And one of those issues is always going to be the issue of taxation, particularly with the estate tax. A corporation doesn't die, so a corporation is never going to have an issue of, needing to come up with, 30% of its value or whatever to pay as part of a transaction. But every family generation that hands down a family farm can be facing that type of a problem. And so that then goes hand in hand with kind of the cultural shift that we have as well. That it's just not everybody wants to farm anymore, and that's fine. Like it's not like everybody has to farm just because it's possible. Farming can be a pretty hard life, but the challenge then is. What do you do with that land, and does it just kind of default to, well, if your own son or daughter doesn't necessarily want to come back to the family farm and farm it, what sort of incentive do you have to preserve it? And because a lot of these lands, like we just saw from the first picture, like these would be prime development lands. Like they're view properties. They're gorgeous. Who wouldn't want to live there and develop that? And that's kind of always one of the pressures that's there for farming, is that development value is potentially really high. But for somebody who has farmed their land for their entire life, somebody who has inherited their farm from generations. I mean, we have homestead families, in the Blue Mountains. Some of these farms are, many generations old, and there's a lifestyle that's associated with that. There's values that are associated with that, and a lot of people, I think, just would be, very devastated to see that history and that tradition and that value be lost just because of the economics of development. So the conservation easement can help really play a tool in that as well, as far as just ensuring that this piece of property that's got this history that can continue. And maybe it won't be, with your family, with your kids. Like I said, not everybody wants to come back and farm. It can be a hard life, but there definitely are people that want to continue to farm these types of properties, and aren't going to be put off by the idea that development on that ground is restricted. That's consistent with the goal of being able to farm it in the first place. So I learned about the conservation easement in part through working with farmers and trying to come up with strategies and options and tools to help preserve the land, as a unit, to help plan for succession, and just to help kind of preserve that culture and that value that a lot of those folks had.
Yeah, you really hit a huge issue on the head, Andrea. It's the average age of a farmer or rancher in Oregon and Washington is mid-60s. Mm-hmm. And I think the most common thing we hear when we talk to those folks who are interested in conserving their land is the next generation doesn't want to come back and farm, or can't, mm-hmm. or they have jobs in other, areas. And or I want my land to be available for the next generation of farmer rancher, whether or not it's my family, but how do I conserve this land and provide for my family when this is my asset? And so conservation easements can just be such a great tool in facilitating succession. And it's really played out in a couple of our projects in a really wonderful way. But once farms are broken up, they become less viable. And that's another part of that too, is if you have to sell off part of the farm to pay the inheritance tax, then the smaller that farm is, the smaller your margin might be. And then there gets to be a point where that is just not viable to make a living. And, a conservation easement can be a way of keeping big farms and ranches intact so that there's less of that risk of impacts to viability as it changes hands. And conservation easements are recorded on the deed, so a landowner can sell the farm. They don't have to leave it to the next generation within their family, but that means whoever buys it, it's still an intact large farm. So yeah, just an increasing issue. We're seeing such a large shift in land passing hands, and we're going to continue to see that over the next 20 years. And so really trying to find creative solutions like easements to help facilitate that generational transfer is going to be really critical to making sure we don't lose a lot of that farmland.
So the educational work that the Land Trust does, this has been some of the fun stuff as well. This was something that we were just kind of starting to develop when I was on the board, was more educational programming, but just also an opportunity to not just learn more about the landscape, but get out and get hands-on with it. So I'd love to hear what the Land Trust is up to with these types of activities these days.
Yeah, so we've had a really robust natural resource education program for a number of years. As you mentioned, we did events for kids, whole families, adults, and we actually took a pause in 2024 and we did an evaluation. We hired a consultant to kind of look at our programming and make sure that we are bringing people high quality natural resource education opportunities, and also that we are accessible. And so we're going to be planning in December and January to relaunch our programming next year. I'm really excited about it. But we do things from taking people on guided hikes of our properties to bringing them out to a wild place with a naturalist or a botanist to teach them about what they see. We get little kids out into the streams and rivers to collect insects that they can look at under microscopes, and just really try and make the environment around people more accessible and more interesting. And we really believe that if you better understand the natural resources and you spend time outside enjoying them, that you'll care about protecting them, because I think people think so often the environment is so separate from them, and realizing that they are really connected, and that there's so much to learn and so much to be excited about and so many beautiful places to go. It's been a really great way for us to connect with people. And also just really, getting your hands in dirt, or like putting your feet in a cold stream, that really, that sells it more than any picture could ever do.
I really agree with that. And it's such an important part about having a connection with the place and with what it is about that place that makes it special, that you can't get from just understanding in the abstract, maybe how some of this stuff works. There's a difference between reading about an eagle in the book and then seeing the eagle, circling above you in the sky. There was a program that I remember I will never forget, because it's one of my favorite ones that we ever did. And we went out to a farm that was outside of Touchy, where they had some alkali bee beds. So alkali bees are it's a native bee that is extremely important in alfalfa seed production. And so this Touchy area is it's a very large producer of alfalfa seed. It needs the alkali bee to play a role in the pollination, and so then you get the seed as a result of that. But they have some fairly specific like environmental needs to be able to survive. And those needs are under pressure, like just, pretty much everything else. Land is under pressure. And this came up particularly in the last decade or so, because there have been some highway projects that are going through some of these lands where a lot of these alkali bees have their habitat. And so there's been a lot of concern about, trying to mitigate the effects on alkali bees, so that we're not, getting taking up too much of their habitat, or constructing the road in a way that's going to have impacts on, like, bees, trying to fly across the road and stuff like that. I mean, they sound like fairly straightforward things, but they're also very, very abstract things. And so to be able to actually be out there on that farm and see what these bee beds are like, and see what these actual bees are like, and how they operate and stuff like that, it sounds like, I mean, maybe it is a little bit of a nerdy thing to be into, but I absolutely loved it, because, it's a unique experience. We didn't have anything like that, where I lived. I would need to go to this place and see that, to be able to appreciate really what's at stake in these conversations about the highways and the effects and so forth. And just also to understand too how that fit in with the agricultural part of the community, the alfalfa production, and what that's like from a farming standpoint compared to other types of agriculture in the community. And so if we weren't producing alfalfa, what would be happening to these lands, and kind of thinking about those downstream effects that you can just really see and appreciate in a way that it just makes it more real and more material than just talking about it, reading about it, thinking about it. Actually seeing it on the ground, like what that would mean, had a big impact on me.
Yeah, I think those experiences especially where you get the experts in the field. I don't think it's nerdy at all. I love when I corner a botanist and be like, what is that flower? I want to know everything about it.
Yes, everything.
I mean, that's the opportunity to really dig in. And, like, even if somebody just remembers one fact or one visual from a trip, hearing something like how many years later you remember all these facts about alkali bees. I mean, that's like what we're hoping for when we get people outside. Is that they'll find something they didn't know about before that will excite them, and that'll get them engaged more in their community and in conservation.
The recreation work is new as well, and this I'm looking forward to this winter as the snow starts to fall.
Yeah, this program is called Blues Crew. This is a trail stewardship program or volunteer program that one of our board members, Greg Brown, started. And it was essentially in reaction to the fact that a lot of our public lands in Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon just needed some help with maintenance of their trails and making sure that trails were accessible and safe, and really just wanting to find a way to give back to both the private land side and the public land side. And so since 2018, we've had more than 200 volunteers. And I think now we've definitely crossed over this threshold, but 23,000 hours of donated time stewarding regional trails. So clearing down logs like you see here, improving tread, access, maps, signs, so that these trails are accessible and safe for people to go spend time in. Again, just trying to facilitate more people getting out into the outdoors. And we've also taken on stewardship of a winter recreation area. This is a really fun project for us, and a place that I think our communities are really excited to have access to, especially now as the snow falls. And we maintain a Nordic ski area that's actually on the Umatilla National Forest. We have a use agreement, and we maintain over 16 miles of snowshoe and cross-country skiing trails. We have an amazing core group of volunteers, including some people who go out and actually groom the trails on snowmobile once or twice a week, so that they are in great condition for people to use. We've had board and staff create beautiful new signs so that people know where they're going, they don't get lost, that there's directional arrows and diamonds, and have really just transformed Horseshoe Prairie into such a world-class recreation area. And this past year, we have incredible volunteers who built this amazing warming hut. And so now it's stationed out in Horseshoe Prairie for people to go and find a little respite from the cold and get to spend some time warming up and gathering with other recreators. So that's a really fun project too. And that's all under our Blues Crew program.
And that's awesome. I'm particularly excited about that one because we have a lot of Nordic skiers in my family. And Nordic skiing has been, it's kind of been present in the Blues for a long time, but they've always really, really struggled with being able to kind of make it feasible to be able to have trails and to be able to maintain them and stuff like that in this area. And so the fact that Blue Mountain Land Trust has really found a way to make this work and to make these collaborations happen and stuff like that, it's really awesome. We've kind of never known, like from year to year for a long time, whether there was going to be, viable cross country skiing back in these areas or not. This is up in kind of the toll gate area, if I don't know if people are familiar with that, and so. Yeah, just kind of knowing that that's going to be there and that, these steps have been taken to make it so accessible and easy to use. Yeah, I'll be getting my my snow pass, no question about it. Very excited.
Well, you'll probably run into some of our staff and board out there. It's just a great way to get outside in the winter when the hours are short and you need a safe and easily marked place to go recreate. And 16 miles of trail, you rarely run into too many people, which is another really nice way of enjoying that in the winter.
There it is, Horseshoe Prairie.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I wish I had put this picture in there, but there's this sign they're putting up in the fall, and they're putting it up on this like 15, 20-foot high post, and then there's a photo of that same post in the winter and somebody is standing and the snow is at the top of it. So yeah, that's
Nice.
the warming hut and a map of the trail. So I hope people are able to enjoy it if you're in the region, but it's a place that we certainly love and we hope is used a lot. We really want it to be a great space for the community to go, and it's free. You need a snow park pass to park your car, but otherwise it is free to recreate.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about it. I think for so many years these areas, people, I mean, understandably the people are trying to operate it commercially, but these aren't high traffic areas. These aren't high population areas. This is not like I don't know, Crystal Mountain or Mount Baker, anything like that. These just aren't going to be on the top of the list, I think, for most people to be thinking about as ski types of destinations. And so it's always been kind of marginal from a commercial standpoint. It really always needed something like this for it to be able to happen. A good volunteer support, a good partnership between different organizations. And so I'm very, very excited about it and very thrilled that you guys have been able to make that happen.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea.
Look at that conservation work there. I mean, there it is. That's the farming. That's the farming in the watershed.
Yeah, we
side by
chose
side.
Yeah, this is the project that kind of started the Blue Mountain Land Trust. So a local family and a local woman, Carolyn Sechrist, was looking for some organization to protect her land back in the 90s. And there wasn't a local land trust. And she kind of reached out to a few community members and really got the ball rolling on a conservation organization. And we completed her conservation easement in 2021. So it was a long time coming, but just a beautiful 215 acres of farmland on the Touchy River. And now that shot of both of the habitat and the farmland is one of my favorites. So these are just our stats, our kind of quick and dirty on all of the work, our conservation easements, and we do actually own a property now. That's a new thing for us. We purchased our first property in 2021. And again, we've conserved 23,327 acres and 44.1 miles of rivers and streams across the Blue Mountains. So I think you've covered this pretty well. If you wanted to skip through just how a conservation easement works, to be a qualifying conservation easement, you have to remove the right to subdivide the land, and it has to restrict or prohibit development. Oftentimes, it also must restrict maybe additional road construction or mining. But a landowner can choose to add additional restrictions, and so can a funding source if they say, for example, if we're funding a farmland preservation project, we want to prohibit uses that will interfere with farmland uses on the property. But those
One
are
of the things One of the things too that I think is important to understand about the conservation easement as a tool is it can be flexible in the sense that yes, to qualify it has to limit the development right, but nobody's telling you how much of your land has to be subject to the conservation easement or how much of it needs to be entirely restricted in development. Those types of things can be and often are negotiated through the landowner because you might have your own property, your own house or your own residence or something like that on the land. And it's not necessarily going to be subject to the same types of restrictions because you might need to rebuild that property or you might need to improve it or you might need to put in a garage or something like that. So it doesn't have to be always like an all or nothing. You're conserving it. You're conserving the entire property or nothing. There's often situations where you have what I think they typically would call it like a building envelope that gets preserved. That's like the developed portion of the property. And often, you will maintain just kind of fairly ordinary, use and development types of rights there. It's really just more about limiting that ability to subdivide more of the property outside of that building envelope. So the actual details of that can be flexible in the negotiation and implementation.
Yeah, every property and project is different. We have some easements that are as small as 13 acres that just cover the riparian area on a large farmland tract. And then we have projects that are, almost 9,000 acres where the whole property is protected. So it really is dependent upon what the landowner's goals are, what the funding source will cover, and then what the resources are that we want to protect. And, when you're talking about an agreement that is forever, we take a lot of time and a lot of intention to ensure that whatever the landowner would like to be able to do with their property in the future, that they're able to do so. So you mentioned a building envelope. That's a great example. A building envelope would be a surveyed or predetermined area on a property where a landowner either has current infrastructure like their home or a barn that they can maintain, repair, or replace, or maybe they say, I would love for my son or daughter to be able to come back and build a second home on the ranch. If they wanted to do that, this would be the area on the farm where they could do that in the future. So we pre-designate that they have the right to develop one more home in that spot. So they really are customizable. And the intent is that each property is unique. And so each agreement should be unique as well.
And I just really appreciate that because that's that flexibility that's so important. That isn't the, you have to do it this way or you're doing it wrong, type of mentality that can just come across so frequently with top down types of rules or regulations or things like that. It really does keep the landowner in the driver's seat and puts them in the position to evaluate and recognize kind of what is most valuable about this particular piece of property. What is it that needs to be conserved? And so it's a way of kind of being able to, with foresight, envision how you can balance the needs of humans living on the land. We need to live on the land as humans. That's always going to be the case. We're always going to have impacts. But how that can be incorporated with a particular piece of property in a way that is that it's most beneficial, both for the people that are going to be living there and for the kind of conservation benefit you get from that property, I think is really valuable. It's a good way for just landowners potentially to be able to have kind of greater understanding about, how and why to do that. Like if I had a 500-acre, parcel, I would be kind of in the dark about where should I put my property, where should I put my house, where should I put my road, how should I construct them in a way that's going to have minimum impact and things like that. And so, to the extent that people value that type of thing with their property, again, kind of having those relationships and those resources available through this process, I think has the potential to really kind of deepen your appreciation of the property and the roles that those different things serve.
Yeah, everything we do is voluntary, and the most important thing that we do in these projects is build relationships with our landowners and ensure that everybody feels heard and everybody feels like their needs are being met, and that these projects are designed to both protect the resource but also achieve the landowner's goals. And I think a lot of times we're able to come up with configurations of projects that can accomplish all of that. But conservation doesn't work as well if you're mandating that somebody do something as it does if somebody is inspired or wants to do something.
Yep.
And so we really value these relationships for that reason. So everybody always wants to know this question: is how do we do this work? And so there's a couple different ways that conservation is done and funded, and one of those routes is donated, and that doesn't mean that the landowner pays for the easement, but the landowner doesn't receive payment for the easement, and they donate the appraised value, and there's some income tax savings there. And if, for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with this tool, when we're trying to figure out how much is a conservation easement worth, we look at what the value of the land is today. If it were to be listed on the market with all of its rights attached, it's a whole bundle of property sticks. And then we would look at what would that property be worth with the conservation easement in place and those specific restrictions. So if you can't divide it, if you can't break it up, if you can't build homes on it, maybe you can't mine it or have roads, whatever the additional restrictions are. And the difference between those two appraisals is the value of the conservation easement. And so a landowner can get a tax deduction for that amount, or they can receive funding for that. And in order to receive funding for that, what we do at the Land Trust is we apply to state and federal grant programs that pay the value of conservation easements, and certain agencies and certain programs will pay for the protection of certain resources. And it's our job to kind of match the project with the funding source. And in those projects where the easement is funded, the landowner would get paid once we close the transaction or complete the due diligence. And you can do both. You can partially donate and you can get some funding. It's really slice and dice it based on your tax needs and your financial circumstances. But in our area, in our service area in particular, we often see that landowners need the funding for the projects because they are generational transfers of land or farms or ranches that have been in the family for a long time. And, they are what we call like land rich, cash poor. And so it is another way of facilitating succession planning is I can conserve my farm and hold it in one block. I can get this payment for the development rights that maybe I'm going to pay off the mortgage. I'm going to reinvest in the infrastructure. I'm going to retire. Some of our farmers and ranchers, that's the way that they can afford to retire. But it can be a really great tool in that regard as well.
This easement here, where's this one?
So this is actually the property that we own. This is Phipps Meadow down in just outside of Prairie City in Grant County, Oregon. And this is a 278-acre property. It's 1.58 miles of the Middle Fork of the John Day River. And the John Day River has some pretty critical importance for the Pacific Northwest. It's the third longest undammed river in the lower 48. and it's the only tributary to the Columbia River that has the last wholly wild remaining population of Chinook salmon. So there's no hatchery on the John Day. And so this is really a stronghold for wild fish. And this property has the headwaters of the Middle Fork. So kind of where the Middle Fork starts is on the Forest Service and on our property. And we found some really amazing beaver dams and beaver work here. But we are going to be embarking on a restoration of this property in the next couple of years.
Exciting.
So again, I think I mentioned this earlier. We have a couple different types of projects we work on. This photo is of the restored property outside of Dayton, Washington, that the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation restored. And we also protect working lands, rivers and streams, and we have some mixed projects. This project was particularly cool for us. It was our first one where we permanently put water back in stream. So we not only bought the land development rights, but we bought the water.
The water rights.
Yeah. And so what the landowner did was he worked with the tribe to restore the floodplain on his property and also to put in some irrigation efficiency projects. Well, with those irrigation efficiency projects, he didn't need the full water right. But if you restore a river, it's no good if there's no water in it. So in this transaction, we also conserved and permanently put some water back in stream. And we are currently working on 2 additional projects that will also be river restoration, permanent land protection, and putting permanent water back in stream. So I think that's kind of the new wave of work in the West is we can restore the rivers, but if there's no water in them, we're missing something.
Yes. And sometime if oh boy, if I wanted to do a piece on sort of the counterintuitive resource management tools, I would talk about water trust, at least in Washington. Water rights is a whole complicated issue out in the West. And there's just, it's a situation where there are a lot of disincentives to conservation for a whole variety of different reasons. And so Walla Walla has had, like I mentioned, a little bit of liberty over the past couple decades to be able to work outside of the ordinary legal framework to try to achieve more water conservation goals, to get more water back in stream and out of irrigation, out of municipal use and so forth. But in terms of like permanent situations, it's not a good legal structure in a whole bunch of different ways. So maybe I'll do a stream about that some point about use. What's extent and validity? I could talk about extent and validity review for quite some time.
I'd watch a water law primer. I feel like I'm constantly needing to learn and pick up on it. It's so nuanced and complex here.
Yes.
But again, like the opportunity to work with a voluntary water savings project was a really cool one for us. This is just a summary of our protected lands. You can see how many projects we have in Washington and their total acreage. So I think your Brewer wetland that you helped plant some of those native plants at, it's about 23 acres.
Okay, 20. I was in the ballpark.
Yeah, it's hard to visualize when you're out there though, because it is such a big, wide open landscape around it. But so you can see most of our properties conserved are in Washington. We were incorporated and founded originally in Walla Walla, which is why a lot of our beginning projects are there. But our biggest places are in Eastern Oregon, and that's just because of the landscape we work in. And so you'll see we have 5 projects in Oregon, but they're about 21,000 of our acres. And
yeah.
Those are the 4 conservation easements that we hold, and then the 1 property that we own.
One thing I'm interested in, I was mentioning in my lead up to this, how I was one of the things I was struggling with when I was kind of evaluating my own relationship with environmentalism and conservation and things like that was the whole top down regulation type of issue, and the regulatory taking, and how that kind of has the potential to be a tool that a government can use to just sort of impose, mandate whatever types of restrictions it wants and achieve its conservation goals that way. Oregon, however, is a little bit different because Oregon has its own land use restriction. They basically adopted a constitutional amendment a few decades ago now, as far as I remember. So Oregon kind of has their own exception to that, where they say, no, actually land use regulations or actions that affect property value, the government has to pay for that. So Oregon has kind of voluntarily taken that regulatory takings tool out of its own belt. And I'm just wondering, I guess it seems to me like, practically speaking, that would create just a very different environment, a very different set of incentives when it comes to conservation in Oregon versus in Washington. I'm wondering if I don't know, that has any kind of practical effect with the work that you do when it comes to evaluating that type of effect. I mean, obviously, you've picked up a ton of protected acreage in Oregon, so it hasn't been a bad thing. But just in terms of that environment, would you say that that's different at all, or not so much, or?
I don't know how much I would attribute to that difference in Oregon's framework, other than I think there's this sense that because Oregon has really strong land use laws, that it's harder to develop or easier to protect land than in other places. But we have, the owners of Secret Valley Ranch, Mark used to be the county planning director, and he'll tell you there's 21 different land uses that are permitted on zoned agricultural land that aren't necessarily what you and I would probably consider agriculture. And that with enough money and enough willpower, you can kind of get around those laws or work them to your benefit. So I think maybe, if anything, there's a misconception that Oregon's land use laws would prevent fragmentation, would prevent development, that we don't necessarily see reflected on the ground. In Eastern Oregon, which is really rural, where some of our communities are frontier communities. You mentioned John Day. I lived there when I first started for the Land Trust, and we had the only stoplight for 2 counties, which was our claim to fame for a while. It was a very big, that was an adjustment from somebody who grew up in Metro Detroit. But we see a lot of rural residential, or we see a lot of fragmentation because people can't afford to hold on to large tracts of land as they're transitioned. So it's not the development that you think of like a big city, but it is more fence lines, more roads, and just that slow rural creep of development, or those 10-acre ranchette type development. So I'm not sure if I totally answered your question, but
yeah, I don't know if there really was an answer. I was just kind of thinking, thinking out loud about one of those just kind of philosophical issues, and I suppose it would just always be a little bit speculation, but it is just one of the interesting things that I always find in this context, particularly since you operate in 2 different states, and since so much of, especially when you're talking about property and how property gets handled and managed and so forth, it's just so, it can be completely different in one state compared to the other. And I don't know, I have that philosophical interest in kind of how it affects the culture when it comes to land ownership. But like I said, it certainly doesn't seem to be a situation where there's been any impediment to doing private conservation in Oregon.
Yeah, I think the biggest impact it has is that we have to navigate 2 different state agency systems, and we have to work with 2 different state legislatures. And when there's funding decisions made, they might be different in one state versus the other. We have a lot of great funding sources in Washington state for land conservation, particularly farmland preservation. Washington has done an incredible job of resourcing its farmland preservation programs. Oregon, not so much. We're going back to the legislature again this year to ask, or in 2025, to ask for them to refund the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, which is the only state funding program we have for farmland preservation in Oregon. It's received funding for the last 2 years, but up until then, we had no state funding source for farmland preservation. So very different landscapes in two adjacent states. So that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is, we have to learn two different systems and play two different games sometimes.
Sure. That looks like some beaver activity.
This is another shot of Phipps Meadow. We've got lots of beaver dam photos. This property was purchased because it has incredible fisheries habitat and really important restoration benefits, but we love all the beaver activity that we find there, and some really cool beaver dams. But I think one of the things that's really important to highlight for a land trust is that we don't just protect a property and then that's the end of our job. We get to, walk away and go on to the next project. We actually have what's called the third party right of enforcement, or the perpetual responsibility to ensure that that conservation easement is followed and that those prohibited uses aren't done on the property, that it's not developed. And so we call this the stewardship of our protected lands. And it's probably it is becoming for us one of the biggest parts of our work, just given the size of our portfolio of lands and the landscape we work on. But we have to go out every year and annually monitor all of our protected properties to ensure that they're doing okay, that we work with the landowners on any natural resource issues. But that is a legal obligation that we have as a conservation organization, and we are committed to when we do those conservation easements.
And so what does stewardship look like on a practical level?
So this year we have 2 stewardship staff. It's the most stewardship staff we've ever had. We're a pretty small shop, but we've got a great team. But that means that they went out on 28 site visits, spent almost 600 hours of time going to every single one of our properties. So they'll meet with the landowner, ask how things are going, discuss changes. Did the landowner use any reserved rights, or are there any issues? They'll walk the property, and we track their routes, and they have what are called photo points, which are repeat places or locations on the property where they'll take a photo to be able to see change in condition over time. So one of the most fun for us is we had a restoration project that we just closed this easement in 2021. And when we did, the willows were about knee high. And we just went back out there a couple of months ago, and the willows are now like 12 feet tall.
Yeah.
So we have a photo of this same location over time. We're going to be able to see that restoration work grow. So that's pretty cool. And it also just helps us see, okay, is there an area of potential concern? And we'll just be able to check on it over time. So we have a full report that we do, and we provide that to landowners, any funders, and just keep that. It's our opportunity to check in with the landowner, continue to build that relationship, and also proactively work together to address any concerns or challenges. And you can see our monitoring stats. It's kind of a fun way to look at like how big our service area is. And this is just one season. So they have to do this every year. And every year we add more protected properties. Those numbers get bigger.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of time. And that's part of where the funding of the land trust comes in, because it isn't just the land trust needs funding to be able to connect people with the resources, to negotiate the easements, to, put the work into place to get the easement established. There's a lot of on the ground work that needs to be done. It's part of the responsibility, like you pointed out. And so that's a big part of what supporting the land trust is going for this ongoing oversight and monitoring of the property.
So this is our property zoomed out. So the beaver dams, you've seen a close up. So this is going to be our biggest foray into restoration. We're really excited about this. Phipps Meadow, again, is incredibly important for its fisheries habitat and being the headwaters of the middle fork of the John Day River. It's surrounded by the Malheur National Forest. So we're working together with the National Forest to design restoration. But this is a high alpine wet meadow ecosystem, which is really important for cold water storage. This meadow in the late spring, early summer is full of wildflowers. I think we've documented over 50 varieties at this point, and just a really big hub for biodiversity. We've documented over 200 different species of birds, fish, wildlife, and plants on this property. And we're going to hopefully only see that number grow as we restore it.
It's very exciting.
So we'll be collaborating with partners, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service, the North Fork John Day Watershed Council, and the Bureau of Reclamation on the wet meadow and river restoration, to really get that riparian habitat up to the highest quality we can. We'll be planting thousands of shade plants like willows and cottonwoods along that stream to cool it down. The biggest limiting factor for fish, for salmon in particularly, their survivability in the summer months is stream temperature. And so we have, I wish I could remember the number, but we have a ton of these cold water springs that come in at this property. And so if we have this cold water that's coming in and we can get the stream shaded and it can stay as cold as possible on its way downstream, that should hopefully have bigger benefit for fish both on and off this property. But that's going to be a really big goal of our river restoration. You can see we caged some willows. This property was historically grazed. We've got Rocky Mountain elk and deer that like to eat all the riparian vegetation. So we've been caging willows. We have some overstocked forest on this property, and some unhealthy stands of trees. So we'll be going in to do some thinning for fire resiliency and for forest health. We've got a few patches of invasive annual grasses, not big at this point, but we want to limit those. And then we've got some historically downed fences and some old riparian fence that we're going to be taking out and repairing. So those are the next couple of projects that we have planned. We'll be starting that restoration work, the forestry work this year, river restoration next year. And the thing that I'm most excited about, talk about nerding out, is we're really trying to track the impacts of our work. We really want to see what is the benefit to the ecosystem of the work that we're doing. So we have been having volunteers out at the property for the last year and a half to track birds. I don't know if anybody is a birder, but there's a really cool app called eBird. We have a hotspot or a profile for this property set up there. And we've documented more than 72 different species utilizing the property. So we're going to be then documenting the birds post-forest restoration. And a lot of our forest restoration objectives are actually designed to improve and increase bird habitat. So we're going to get to see how that actually plays out. We have partners who've been snorkeling the river and streams to detect changes. Yeah, that's the part I want to get out there for.
Yeah, right.
But they do snorkel surveys to detect changes in fish use, distribution, to see different species and what the riparian ecosystem looks like. And then we've also been mapping culturally sensitive native plants. This area was historically used for traditional gathering. And so when we're designing restoration, we want to ensure that we're minimizing impacts to any culturally sensitive species like camas and other plants. And we can hopefully, our plan is to facilitate access to tribal members to be able to access that resource in the future. But really want to be intentional with our restoration design that we don't impact that negatively. And we've also been monitoring the flow and the water temperature to see if our restoration lowers the temperature and increases the flow in stream.
Is there any kind of like projection or like estimate or anything like that? Is it just going to be kind of see what we get, or do you have, I don't know, goals for like 10 years down the road? Any type of numeric kind of estimate for the impact that this is going to have?
I don't. I'm not the biologist who's in the weeds on it, so there might
Sure.
be this information, but I don't believe we have specific like quantitative numbers that we're trying to get. We're trying to see an increase in fish distribution and utilization of the river. So that's what the pre-restoration surveys are, to document, and so we can see
Mm-hmm.
the uplift.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the birds, we're hoping to continue to see the same species, if not more, and the frequency
Mm-hmm.
increase. But I don't think we've set target goals. One of the cool things about this property is it's in what's called the Middle Fork intensively monitored watershed, which is a specific watershed where the state of Oregon and partners have been monitoring the impacts of restoration for 15 years on other parts of the Middle Fork that have been restored. And so we're going to benefit from what they've learned of what has worked on other properties, where have they seen the most improvement and uplift,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that we design this restoration, but also we get to add to this collective body of knowledge of 15 years of river restoration on this same stretch of river, the same system. And they gave a really cool presentation in September where they actually said that they were tracking salmon in two similar systems, so the Tucannon River in Washington, and the Warm Springs River in Central Oregon. Very similar in terms of their precipitation and their elevation. And in the same time period where they were tracking the Middle Fork, populations in those other two rivers declined and the Middle Fork stayed the same.
Hmm.
So we know that the restoration, if anything, held that population stable.
Sure.
And we're just hoping that now we can start to see it swing into uplift. But I thought it was really cool to see that, when other systems are staying the same, they're declining, but all that work we're doing is having some benefit. So we're excited to kind of add to that benefit and add to that body of knowledge.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting, and I'm so interested too in just seeing the downstream effects of that as well, like the things that aren't necessarily being anticipated right now, but they're going to be inevitable. I mean, if the watershed is healthier, there's more fish as part of the ecology. That's going to shift the ecology in terms of the historically it's one of those things where the salmon have been such an important part of not just the food chain, in terms of predators and things like that, but just the geology as a whole. I mean, there's like old stories from the Lewis and Clark days about, the salmon would like literally be in the forest, as part of like the forest floor, and helping to contribute to the soils ultimately. And of course, we're so far removed from that type of environment today, that type of volume of fish today. But just seeing kind of incrementally how things, can move more in that direction, more towards that historic type of environment, and that role that the fish played. I think that's going to be really fascinating to see.
Yeah, the more we dig into it, the more we learn about one component of this property, it just opens up so many other questions and so many other things we didn't know were happening. So I think that's fun for us to be the landowner, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not normally in this role, and so it's been a really great learning experience, and also just a really gives you a good appreciation for our landowners and all the complexities that they navigate on their properties.
Sure.
But we're really just excited to be able to learn and adapt. And, the more complex an ecosystem is, the more resilient it is. And so
Mm-hmm.
we want to just do everything we can to ensure that we're taking care of and increasing the resiliency at Phipps Meadow.
Love these.
Yeah, some the beaver, we go and we like try and oh, that tree wasn't down last time, or they got that one. And my favorite, I wish I had a photo of it, is there's a place where the beavers are going from the forest back into the river, and it looked almost like potato chips
Oh,
sprinkled along
wow.
this trail they were using, all the little wood chips. So yeah, they've been fun to watch.
And this photo, one of my favorite photos I think I've ever seen of any of the land trust property.
Yeah, this is a framer for sure. We're just so ecstatic that we got this image from a local photographer, Matt Franklin. But this is a beaver dam on Phipps Meadow in the Milky Way, and you know, one of the beautiful things about the blues is that we can still see things like this, and we want to ensure that those things are still there. So yeah, you can check us out our website or on social media. But thank you for letting me run through a synopsis of our work. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm really been glad to have you here and kind of help me tell this story about this organization and kind of where it fits in the whole conservation scheme. It is a little bit different from what I normally talk about on my channel. But it's important, I think, just as a unique legal kind of tool and framework that's available that isn't something that people are necessarily super familiar with. I think it's an important thing to learn about, especially out here in the West, where we do have, such a large amount of land, such large tracts of land, often still in private ownership, and just these values that we want to continue to preserve, the farmland lifestyle, the outdoor lifestyle, the ecology, all of these types of issues that go into having a relationship with a particular place, and just how that, I think, helps ground us and help characterize us. I was telling people, because I recently spent several weeks back in Indiana, and it's a very different landscape. I love to travel. I love to see different types of landscapes. But when people ask about, my landscape and my home and kind of the place that shaped me, well, that's the channeled scablands. And that's my country. And I think it's one of those valuable things to be able to have a connection with a particular place that's meaningful. And the Blue Mountains have been a very meaningful part of my life and part of my experience. And I think for so many other people in the region as well, it's very special. So I really appreciate the work that the Blue Mountain Land Trust has done to help keep it a special place. The tool that they have to make that a reality. The collaborative approach that it fosters, that from that philosophical standpoint, is one that encourages people to be good stewards instead of antagonizing them or alienating them from the very things that you're trying to protect and preserve, I think is such an important part of the equation. So thank you for kind of giving me the opportunity to share some of these things with folks on my channel.
Yeah, well, thank you, Andrea. We appreciate your support and your history as a board member and all that you've done to give back to our work and land conservation. And I think if there's one thing I could impart on people, is that we can achieve so much more and achieve so much more positive impact in our communities if we find ways to work together. And finding that sweet spot often is finding those places that we can come together around. And that's the beautiful part of this work and what we love to do. And if you're ever looking for a beautiful place to visit, I'd always say come to the Blue Mountains, but just don't tell anybody else.
Yeah. We'll keep it between ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Marty. Appreciate you being here. And it's been wonderful to have you on and to share this story.
Thank you, Andrea.
So guys, that's kind of my story of conservation. And hope that you understand maybe a little bit more about me and my approach and why this particular charity, this particular organization is one that has meant so much to me. Why its mission is one that I have supported and continue to support, and want to thank all of you for supporting if you are so inclined to do so. We did have a couple questions that came up that I wanted to go ahead and address. I think on Giving Tuesday next week, the Blue Mountain Land Trust is offering triple matching. Is that correct? That's very nice. You have some donors doing that. Do you know what they are matching up to? Jeff. Actually, if Marty is still here, maybe I'll bring her back on and see if she can answer that.
Yeah, thanks. So we are, there is a local foundation called the Blue Mountain Community Foundation. And starting on Giving Tuesday, you can donate to the Blue Mountain Land Trust through what's called the Valley Giving Guide. And Blue Mountain Community Foundation will give a 7 to 10% match to all of the donations that we receive through the month of December. And we will have a matching challenge. We do have a donor who's doing a matching challenge. I just don't know what day we're announcing that, but we will have more opportunities to match any donations to the Land Trust.
Perfect. And so that looks like the same comment as well from CH, that from the BMLT page, make a one-time gift in the month of December through the Valley Giving Guide, and your impact will be increased by a match, and this starts on Tuesday. So if folks are so inclined, we have shared the PayPal link for the Blue Mountain Land Trust here in the chat, as well as in the channel description. If you are inclined to support the organization, you can certainly do it that way. But if you are inclined to support it and want to start on Tuesday through the Valley Giving Guide, then you can make a little bit of an extra impact. So it's very good thing to know.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. The support helps us fund all of this great work, the staff time to develop amazing projects, and all of the hard work that goes into completing conservation work. So we do appreciate your support, but I also just really appreciate people being interested. So please feel free to check out our website, ask questions. We love getting to talk to people about this work.
Pull this one up real quick. I don't understand the maps that show whole counties under the land trust. Are these areas of planned expansion? Is this a legal designation? What does it mean? So this is that service area map that we were looking at before. And you can kind of fill in on this, Marty, but the service map is just basically the areas where the Blue Mountain Land Trust will work on conservation in these areas. And this is it's not a legal designation or anything like that. This is basically the way that land trusts in different communities have kind of worked out amongst themselves, sort of who is primary or who is like in charge, so to speak, of a particular area. And that's just mainly for coordination types of purposes. But if I got any of that wrong, definitely correct me.
No, that's spot on. That's the geographic area we will work in.
Perfect. All right. And then we got a super chat from Pammy that nature has a way of speaking if you really listen to it. I could not agree more. I could not agree more. I started off with my my John Muir quote, and there's always a John Muir quote, but one of my favorites is the clearest way into the universe is through a forest wilderness. It does. I mean, there's just something about that experience with nature that, I don't know, if it connects with you in a way that really nothing else does. And so having the opportunity to have those types of experiences out in the wild, out in these types of landscapes, out under these types of skies, it's irreplaceable, and it's an important part of the human soul and human development. And so it's something that has the potential to be able to bring us together in a way that's meaningful and significant and transformative for all of us. So part of why we do what we do. All right, everybody. Well, I really appreciate you joining all of us for the program here today, and for your interest, like Marty said, in conservation in general, but in this specific kind of niche area of private land conservation through the conservation easement. It is the time of year to think about who we support and how we support them, and ways that we can give back and appreciate one another and be better members of our community. I always enjoy this type of year. It's a reflective time. So for me, this has been a fun experience to think back on my time in the land trust and the wonderful times we've had, the places I got to see and visit through my work with this organization, and the great work that it continues to do. And it's just been amazing to see the land trust continue to grow and expand and do such good work throughout this beautiful part of the world. So with that, everybody, I am going to go ahead and say good evening to everybody. Happy holidays to all of you. And I will look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.